In the vast expanse of space, humanity had always been told we were insignificant. The Galactic Council saw us as nothing more than primitive newcomers, barely worth acknowledging. Our ships, they said, were too small, our fleet too modest, our ambitions too grand for such a young species. We became the laughingstock of the council chambers, with the larger alien civilizations dismissing us as the tiny fleet. I remember standing on the bridge of the TSS, Defiant, that fateful day, watching the massive Drachnid warships emerge from hyperspace. Their vessels stretched for kilometers, dwarfing our destroyers and frigates. The alien commander's transmission crackled through our comms with unmistakable disdain. "Surrender your outer colonies now, humans. Your toy ships cannot hope to stand against us." Captain Sarah Chen, my commanding officer, merely smiled. I had served under her for 3 years, and I knew that smile. It was the same one she wore when playing chess, right before checkmating her opponent. "Lieutenant," she said to me, "send the signal to all ships. Execute Formation Delta." What the Drachnids didn't understand, what none of the alien races had bothered to learn, was that size isn't everything. While they were busy mocking our smaller vessels, they had overlooked the most crucial detail: human ingenuity. Our ships might have been compact, but they were designed by people who had spent centuries perfecting the art of naval warfare on Earth's oceans. The Drachnids had expected us to meet them head-on, to try matching their brute force. Instead, our tiny fleet split into countless smaller squadrons, moving with a coordination that caught them completely off guard. We had studied Earth's wolf packs, ancient Viking shield walls, and modern swarm tactics. Every ship knew its role, every captain understood their part in the greater strategy. "They're breaking formation," my tactical officer reported, trying to hide a grin. The massive Drachnid ships, designed for grand battles between capital ships, couldn't track our faster, more agile vessels. Their heavy weapons, while devastating, couldn't lock onto targets moving with such precise unpredictability. Captain Chen leaned forward in her command chair. "Send word to all ships. Commence Phase 2. The next few minutes would either validate everything humanity had worked for or prove our critics right." Our fleet had spent years preparing for this moment, developing technologies and tactics that played to our strengths rather than trying to match the conventional wisdom of space warfare. The Drachnids never saw it coming. Their mighty shields, designed to withstand massive energy weapons, had a fatal flaw. They couldn't adapt to thousands of smaller impacts occurring simultaneously across their hull. Like a swarm of persistent wasps, our ships struck from every angle, exploiting gaps in their defenses that their engineers had never thought to protect. I watched as the first Drachnid battleship's shields began to flicker. Their arrogant transmission from earlier had been replaced by frantic communications between their vessels. The mighty predators were beginning to realize they had severely underestimated their prey. But just as victory seemed within our grasp, something unexpected happened. A new signal appeared on our long-range scanners, massive signatures, unlike anything we'd encountered before. Captain Chen's expression turned grave as she studied the readings. Whatever was coming through that hyperspace window, it wasn't part of our intelligence reports. The bridge fell silent as we waited, our fleet's formation holding steady despite the uncertainty. We had already proven ourselves against impossible odds, but now we faced an unknown variable. The question hanging in everyone's mind was clear. Had we truly shown the galaxy what humanity was capable of, or had we only awakened something far worse? The hyperdrive signatures grew stronger, and I could feel my heart pounding as the sensors struggled to make sense of what we were about to face. The massive hyperspace signatures materialized into something none of us had expected. Civilian ships. Not just any civilian ships, but massive refugee vessels from dozens of different species. They were fleeing, their vessels packed with families, children, and elders. The Drachnids weren't just attacking Earth's colonies. They were on a systematic campaign of conquest across this entire sector of space. Captain Chen's voice cut through the stunned silence on our bridge. "All ships, maintain formation. These people need our protection." The refugee vessels were broadcasting desperate distress signals in multiple languages, their messages painting a horrific picture. The Drachnids had already conquered 3 peaceful civilizations in the past month alone. I watched as our tactical display updated, showing the full scope of what we faced. Behind the refugee ships, more Drachnid warships were emerging from hyperspace, at least twice the number we'd already engaged. Our tiny fleet had bloodied their nose, but now we were about to face the full fury of their armada. Engineering reports our shield modulators are at 60% capacity, my tactical officer announced, her fingers dancing across the holographic controls. The first wave took more out of us than we expected, Captain. Around us, other human ships were reporting similar situations. Our innovative tactics had worked, but they had also drained our resources faster than anticipated. The refugee ships were now caught between our fleet and the approaching Drachnid armada. Their captains were pleading for assistance, knowing they'd be shown no mercy if captured. These weren't military vessels. They were the equivalent of passenger liners and cargo ships, packed well beyond their normal capacity with desperate civilians. Captain Chen stood from her command chair, her expression resolute. "Send word to all ships. We're initiating Protocol Sanctuary." A murmur went through the bridge crew. Protocol Sanctuary was something we drilled for but never expected to actually use. It was a defensive formation designed to protect civilian vessels during an evacuation, but it would put our ships at extreme risk. "Man," I said, turning to face her, "if we commit to Protocol Sanctuary, we'll lose the maneuverability advantage that gave us the edge in the first engagement. We'll be fighting a conventional battle against superior numbers and firepower." The captain's only response was a slight nod. She knew exactly what she was asking of her crew and our fleet. As our ships began moving into their new positions, forming a protective sphere around the refugee vessels, we received a transmission from the Drachnid flagship. Their commander appeared on our main view screen, his scaled features twisted in what passed for amusement among his species. "How touching," he sneered. "The tiny human fleet thinks it can play guardian to the weak. Your extinction will serve as an example to all who defy the Drachnid Empire." But as we watched the enemy fleet approaching, something unexpected began happening on our tactical displays. The refugee ships weren't just sitting idle. They were moving, coordinating with each other in a pattern that seemed oddly familiar. Captain Chen noticed it too, her eyes widening as she realized what we were seeing. The civilian vessels were arranging themselves in a formation that mirrored ancient Earth naval tactics, specifically those used by merchant convoys during humanity's world wars. These weren't just random refugee ships. They had been studying us, learning from humanity's history of protecting the vulnerable against overwhelming odds. As the Drachnid fleet drew closer, our sensors detected strange energy readings from within the refugee ships. Whatever was about to happen would either be our salvation or our doom, and we had just seconds to decide if we could trust these desperate allies. The energy readings from the refugee ships suddenly made sense as hidden panels began sliding away from their hulls, revealing what appeared to be modified mining equipment. These weren't just civilian vessels. They were industrial ships that had been purposefully disguised. The various alien species aboard them had been sharing intelligence, watching how humanity fought, and preparing for this moment. "Captain," I called out, analyzing the new data streaming across my console. "Those are gravitic mining beams, usually used for breaking down asteroids. They've been modified to—" I trailed off as understanding dawned. The refugee ships weren't helpless at all. They had turned their mining tools into weapons, but they needed our fleet's protection to get close enough to use them effectively. The Drachnid commander must have realized something was wrong because his next transmission carried none of his previous arrogance. "All ships, open fire. Destroy those vessels before they—" His order was cut short as our fleet executed another perfectly coordinated maneuver, our smaller ships darting between the massive Drachnid warships like schools of fish confusing a predator. The modified mining beams activated, creating localized gravity wells that began pulling at the Drachnid ship's armor plating. It wasn't enough to tear their vessels apart, but that wasn't the plan. The gravitational disruption was interfering with their targeting systems, creating windows of opportunity for our fleet to exploit. "This is why they came to us," Captain Chen said, a note of pride in her voice. "Their technology combined with our tactics. They chose humanity as allies because we were the only ones who kept fighting back." Around us, the battle was transforming into something the galaxy had never seen before, a perfect synthesis of human ingenuity and alien industrial engineering. But the Drachnids weren't going to go down easily. Their capital ships began launching waves of fighters, trying to overwhelm our coordinated defense with sheer numbers. The space around us lit up with weapons fire, turning the battlefield into a deadly light show of energy beams and explosions. "Hull breach on Deck 7. Someone shouted as our ship took a direct hit. Emergency force fields snapped into place, but the damage was spreading. Similar reports were coming in from other vessels in our fleet. We were hurting them, but they were hurting us back just as hard. The refugee ships' gravitic weapons were straining under the constant use, their modified systems never designed for prolonged military engagement. We could see their energy signatures fluctuating, growing weaker with each passing minute. If their weapons failed before we could press our advantage, both our fleets would be vulnerable to the full might of the Drachnid armada. New contacts. My tactical officer's voice carried a mix of fear and hope. More ships were emerging from hyperspace, but in the chaos of battle, we couldn't tell if they were friendly or hostile. The Drachnids seemed equally confused, their formation shifting as they tried to adjust to the new arrivals. Captain Chen gripped her command chair as another impact rocked our ship. "Lieutenant, get me an identification on those ships. Now." But before I could answer, our ship's artificial gravity flickered. One of the refugee vessel's gravitic beams had passed too close to us. For a moment, everything that wasn't bolted down began floating, including several crew members. As I grabbed my console to stay in place, my screens lit up with recognition signals from the incoming vessels. The identification codes were like nothing I'd ever seen before, but they were broadcasting on frequencies that only one group in the galaxy would know to use. The incoming ships were broadcasting on old Earth frequencies, specifically patterns based on World War II naval codes that had been modified and modernized. As their formation became clear through the chaos of battle, I felt my breath catch. They were human vessels, but not from any fleet I recognized. Their design was completely different from our standardized military ships, more organic-looking, almost alien in their construction. "This is Admiral Chen of the Solar Diaspora," a familiar voice transmitted across all frequencies. "Sorry we're late to the party, Sarah." Captain Chen's face showed shock for the first time since I'd known her. The voice belonged to her mother, who had disappeared along with an experimental colony ship 15 years ago while testing an advanced prototype drive. The new vessels moved with incredible grace, their hulls seeming to bend and flex in ways that should have been impossible for metal constructs. They had somehow merged human engineering with organic technology, creating ships that moved like living creatures through space. The Drachnids' targeting systems couldn't keep up with their fluid, unpredictable movements. "We found something out there in deep space," Admiral Chen continued, her voice carrying years of hidden knowledge. "Something that showed us a different way to build, to fight, to survive. We've been preparing, gathering allies, waiting for the right moment. The Drachnids aren't just conquering territories, they're running from something, and we know what it is." As if to emphasize her words, several of the Diaspora ships began to change shape, their hulls reconfiguring in real time to form new weapon configurations we'd never seen before. The Drachnid fleet actually began to retreat, their previous confidence shattered by the appearance of ships that defied their understanding of physics and engineering. But our momentary advantage was interrupted by a bone-chilling sound, a deep, resonating frequency that seemed to cut through ships' hulls and into our very minds. The refugee ships' captains began broadcasting panicked messages. They recognized that sound. It was the very thing the Drachnids had been fleeing from, and somehow our battle had drawn its attention. "All ships, maintain formation," Captain Chen ordered, though I could hear the strain in her voice. The strange frequency was affecting everyone, making it hard to focus. Through our view screens, we watched as space itself seemed to ripple and distort, like fabric being pulled apart by unseen hands. The Drachnid commander's next transmission surprised us all. "Humans," he said, his previous arrogance replaced by genuine fear, "we offer an immediate cessation of hostilities. What comes next is beyond our petty conflicts. Your tiny fleet has proven its worth, Now we must all stand together, or what emerges from that rift will be the end of everything we know." Admiral Chen's voice cut through the growing chaos. "Sarah, remember those stories Mom used to tell us about the deep-sea creatures on Earth? About how they evolved in complete darkness?" She paused, and I could hear decades of preparation in her next words. "What we found out there, it's been evolving in the darkness between galaxies. And now, thanks to all our fighting, we've just rung the dinner bell." The rift in space continued to grow, and our sensors were going haywire, trying to analyze what lay beyond. We had 3 fleets: our own ships, the refugee vessels with their modified mining equipment, and the mysterious organic hybrid vessels of the solar diaspora. Even the Drachnids, our bitter enemies moments ago, were now turning their ships to face the growing anomaly. But as the rift finally began to open fully, revealing what lurked behind it, we realized that even our combined forces might not be enough to face what was coming through. Through the massive rift emerged something that defied description, a vast, crystalline entity that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. It moved with a cold intelligence, its structure constantly shifting like a living kaleidoscope. Our sensors couldn't get a clear reading on its size because it appeared to exist partially in dimensions our instruments couldn't detect. "All ships, Battle Formation Omega," Admiral Chen commanded, her voice steady despite the terror-inducing sight before us. The Drachnid fleet, now our allies by necessity, fell into position alongside us. Their massive warships provided a powerful front line while our more agile vessels maneuvered between them. The refugee ship's gravitic weapons might be our only advantage against this interdimensional horror. But the entity didn't attack immediately. Instead, it projected a series of mathematical patterns into space, complex equations that seemed familiar somehow. Captain Chen was the first to recognize them. "Those are navigation calculations," she said, her eyes widening. "Similar to what we use for hyperspace travel, but far more advanced." As we watched, the solar diaspora ships began to respond with their own patterns of light and energy. They had encountered this type of communication before. "It's not hunting," Admiral Chen explained, her voice filled with wonder. "It's been searching for species advanced enough to understand what it's trying to tell us." The entity's crystalline surface rippled, and suddenly our ship's computers began receiving massive amounts of data. Star charts, hyperspace coordinates, and warnings. Thousands of them. The creature wasn't a predator. It was a messenger. Throughout the galaxy, more rifts were opening. Something worse was coming. Something that had already consumed countless galaxies. "This is why we disappeared 15 years ago," Admiral Chen continued. "We found one of its beacons, learned what it was trying to warn us about. We've been preparing, adapting our technology, gathering allies. But we needed something more. We needed proof that different species could work together, could overcome their prejudices when faced with a greater challenge." The Drachnid commander's voice cut through the command channel. "The attacks, the conquests. We were trying to unite the galaxy under one rule, to prepare for what we knew was coming. We chose the wrong path, but perhaps the humans have shown us a better way." Captain Chen stood at her command station, her voice carrying the weight of command. "Then let's not waste this opportunity. All ships, begin downloading the entity's data. We need to understand what we're up against and how to prepare." She turned to me with a hint of her familiar smile. "Lieutenant, looks like our tiny fleet just became part of something much bigger." But as we began processing the information, a final warning came through. The rifts appearing across the galaxy weren't random. They were forming a pattern, creating a vast network of dimensional tiers, and at the center of that pattern was Earth's solar system. We hadn't just proven ourselves worthy of receiving this warning. We had unknowingly positioned ourselves at the focal point of incoming invasion that would dwarf anything the galaxy had ever faced. The crystalline messenger began to fade, its purpose fulfilled. In its wake, it left us with one final message: a series of coordinates leading to what it called the Forge, a place where the first species it warned had left their most powerful weapons and technology. The same species whose ruins we've been finding scattered across the galaxy for centuries, their civilization apparently destroyed overnight. Captain Chen exchanged looks with her mother across the video link. "Well," she said, managing a grim smile, "they used to mock us for having a tiny fleet. Now let's show them what humanity does best, uniting people and building something greater than ourselves." Around us, the combined fleet of humans, drachnids, and refugee ships began coordinating their next move. The galaxy was about to change forever, and Earth's so-called tiny fleet had just become its first line of defense. The coordinates led our combined fleet to a system deep in what we'd always called the dead zone, a region of space where no natural planets formed. Instead, we found something far more extraordinary. A massive artificial structure, a perfect sphere the size of a small moon, covered in the same crystalline material as our mysterious messenger. As our ships approached the forge, ancient defense systems hummed to life, scanning our vessels. For a tense moment, we waited, weapons ready, unsure if we'd be seen as worthy inheritors or unwelcome intruders. Then massive doorways began opening across the sphere's surface, revealing cavernous docking bays that could accommodate even the largest drachnid warships. "This is what we can achieve together," Admiral Chen said, addressing the combined fleet, "not through conquest or domination, but through unity and understanding." The drachnid ships, once our bitter enemies, now flew in perfect formation with our vessels as we entered the ancient structure. The refugee ships, their mining equipment having proven so crucial in our battle, took up defensive positions around the forge perimeter. Inside, we found more than just weapons. The forge contained the complete technological and cultural legacy of the first species, the civilization that had first encountered the threat we now faced. They hadn't been destroyed as we'd always assumed. They had sacrificed themselves, using their entire civilization's energy to create this facility and send out the crystalline messengers, knowing that someday the right combination of species would find it and continue their work. The next few weeks were a blur of discovery and cooperation. The drachnid's natural understanding of quantum mechanics complemented human intuition and creativity. The refugee species brought their own unique perspectives and technologies. The solar diaspora's organic hybrid ships proved to be the perfect testing ground for integrating the ancient technologies we were discovering. Captain Chen and I stood on an observation deck, watching as the first new ships emerged from the forge's construction bays. They were unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Vessels that combined the best aspects of every species' technology with the legacy of the first species. "Not bad for a tiny fleet, wouldn't you say, Lieutenant?" she asked, that familiar confident smile playing across her face. The Galactic Council, which had once mocked humanity's modest space force, now sought our leadership in preparing for the coming threat. Our ability to unite former enemies and forge unlikely alliances had proven more valuable than any weapon or technology. The very qualities they had dismissed. Our adaptability, our willingness to try unconventional tactics, our determination to protect others, had turned out to be exactly what the galaxy needed. As I look out at our new combined fleet today, I can't help but feel a sense of pride. The ships are larger now, more powerful than we could have imagined, but they still move with the same coordinated grace that made our tiny fleet so effective. We're still learning, still adapting, preparing for a war unlike anything we've ever faced. But we're no longer alone. That's the real lesson we learned from all of this. It was never about the size of the fleet, the power of our weapons, or the advanced technology we possessed. It was about understanding that true strength comes from unity, from bringing together different perspectives and abilities to create something greater than ourselves. The galaxy still faces an uncertain future. The dimensional rifts continue to grow, and we know the real battle still lies ahead. But thanks to a tiny fleet that refused to back down, that chose to protect rather than conquer, that dared to trust former enemies and forge new alliances, we face that future together. And together, we stand ready for whatever emerges from the darkness between the stars.